I want to bring it back a little bit to, someone like whoever you're talking about, the shooter. I think it's really common now of feeling this thing pop up, especially something like that, where it's not like a mechanism of injury at the knee, but it's more of like this mechanical issue, whether above or below, of people wanting to rest it and like, oh, I rested, I stopped doing the things that were irritating it, and now it feels better because I've given it time for the inflammatory response to go down, all the pain to dissipate and all that, and it feels better. But as soon as they end up going back to the things they want to do or the task, then the issue comes back up. So the culture of resting, it is very clear both in the rehab world, but also from experience of most of the time, the answer is not to just rest something away.
Stop.
That's just letting the pain dissipate, but that's not going to fix the issue. So sometimes it is doing the boring things, like doing the things to take a step back and fixing the mechanics of the motor pattern you're doing, or working on things above and below. And sometimes that can take time. So I've said it again about my knee, that took like 7 months for me to rechange some patterning, because it was stuff going on with my ankle and my hip and a lot of how my mechanics was in squatting, in addition to managing the tissue right at the knee joint. So being patient of not backing off and thinking then that fixes it, and then going right back and spinning your wheels and just doing that over and over again, which I think a lot of the average gym goer does, is they have these things pop up and then they rest and then they feel better. And then they, or even like in the physical therapy world, I think some people's issue with that is kind of what you're talking about with your shoulder earlier, of regressing so much that thinking that the rehab exercises you're doing were fixing it, but really it was the regression in stimulus, which leads to a regression in your total fitness, your total strength, your total muscle mass, which from a performance or health or psychological standpoint isn't good long-term. So it's like, how do you either keep doing those things and fix the issue while you're doing it, or dial back with the intention of still testing the waters to get back to the activity that you're trying to do. So I kind of going back to the first thing I started this off with is patience, of being willing to like see how things feel after a few days, seeing how an exercise feels specifically that day, like knowing that your body, for most of us, like it's not that fragile, there's training status, training history, all those different things, but it's your body's not fragile. So testing of, hey, how does this squat feel? How did my body respond? And, even I have a client right now who has a knee issue, and they had something pop up and it was painful. And I believe it was painful and there was swelling, things like that. But working through of being patient, of testing the waters, knowing that they're not broken, coming back to some exercises and seeing how your body responds after a few days, and being willing to trust that process.
So important. And one of the things to understand there too is if you're doing that diligently with a concerted effort, that you're going to find your threshold likely. Yeah. And that threshold might mean a little setback, right? You may irritate that thing a little bit more again, and being prepared for that, because it'll likely happen, right? It'll likely happen. So understanding, okay, and this is why tracking and being on an organized program and having consistency is so important, so that you can go, I know what I did, when I did it, how much, how little, whatever the case was, so that now you have a litmus for how to adjust appropriately and manage, again, whether it's intensity, load, volume, the different variables that we put into that, so that as you're looking for, you're testing that threshold the next time, you can do so from a more informed position. And so you have to be willing to push a little bit, with the understanding, obviously, with a certain level of appropriateness, that it could come up again. It's not gone, right? And remember, in understanding again the depth of whatever it is, whether it's cumulative, acute, whatever, how are we fixing this? And fixing is a very broad term, right? Or are we simply doing the things that we need to do to make this better, to give me a better platform to now establish a new threshold, whatever that is, without any preconceived notions or any unrealistic expectations. And I think what happens when people aren't getting that, or because they're not putting in the work, right? They're not being consistent. And one of the things that came up for me there when you were talking about that is just like how important the foundational movement patterns are, that we need to be doing this. And as soon as we start cutting them out, or what I'm about to go to next, as soon as we start cutting them out to find the workaround to be able to avoid the feeling that we were feeling, right, is the second you start moving backwards at an exponential rate. Yeah. And for as long as you spend time moving backwards, again, ignoring something, or in this case, like not doing a foundational movement pattern with a full range of motion, right, under appropriate amount of load, tempos, things like that, you are now working backwards, whether you recognize that or not. Just because you're not feeling it doesn't mean you're getting better, right? And when that ultimately rears its ugly head because you've done those kind of things, I find it very interesting how quickly people will reach for a crutch, right? Like some type of a prophylactic, or I need a brace, right? I need a
cortisone.
I need a sleeve, right? Yeah, I need a cortisone shot.
Copper fit.
There is a time and place for all of that stuff, for sure. I mean, we got the AT sitting across the table. Like she will tell you, like, if there's a return to play plan and we need this person back on the field, the court, the gym, the range, whatever the case is, there's a time and place for that. But that should not be the fix or the answer. It is a part of the return to play process. And we need to be testing the thresholds with and without the help or the crutch that you're looking for. So again, like the elbow sleeve, like there's been plenty of times where I wore an elbow sleeve for a period of time so I could continue to do the thing, but that didn't take away from the quote unquote maintenance work, right, or rehab work that I needed to do to get myself out of that. And as a result, I haven't had that sleeve on in over a year, right? I feel way better. And there were times where I was really frustrated, right? And I had to back off. But reaching for something like that, an outside, extrinsic, some type of modality or prophylactic to fix your problem is not the right answer. It isn't the right answer. And so I find it really quick, whether it's a fucking supplement or, a piece of gear or a piece of equipment. We brought up the shooting thing a few times, man. That's the first thing dudes will go to. Like, I suck at this. It's got to be my equipment, right? It's the gun. It's the optic. I need to go spend $2,000 on a new piece of equipment, and that's going to make me better at this. It's not that. It always goes back to the fundamentals. Always goes back to the fundamentals. So again, going back to foundational fundamental movement patterns, like, you need to be really good at that stuff. And it's likely, if it wasn't an acute thing, right, that happened, an acute injury, largely probably the bigger part of your problem is those things weren't in line. Like, you didn't have your shit squared away. So you need to go back to revisiting that. At the same time, going back to the psychology piece, you got to be ready for that, right? And so if you can get your head around that now, like before this stuff pops up, or if you're in that phase right now, where you're like, yeah, like, I'm not feeling great. Like, this thing is really bothering me. I would encourage you don't have to be an expert, like, on exercise to do this. Go back and look at, like, what are the foundational things that you're doing? And are you really putting in the correct amount of effort, volume, stimulus, intensity, all those things to making those things really great? You'd be surprised at how much better you will feel and ultimately perform, if you do that. And along the way, you could be feeling a lot of discomfort while you're doing that, and being okay with that. Again, am I hurt or am I injured? So I think the next thing is like evaluating that, like, whether it was acute or cumulative. And I think, like, everybody's got a different threshold for that. Unfortunately, the higher achiever tends to get deeper and deeper into the, I've been trying to manage around this. I've been dealing with this pain, this no days off mentality, or whatever else. So they get themselves to a point where now you have a lot more work to do than you probably would have had to do at the beginning if we'd addressed this a little bit differently. And I think it's really hard for people to do. On the flip side, the other end of that spectrum is, you brought this up, is like having it stop you in your tracks, which then certainly you're not moving forward. And most likely you're going to be moving backwards from this point that you already are. Is that really the right answer for you?